In this video, I want to explain to you why the vast majority of people are just straight up wrong about Cruor's Embrace, may not necessarily understand how the impact of both greater affixes as well as Masterwork crits are in the overall output of a build like Surge Necromancer, which uses these gloves. Give you a crash course in not only how to calculate things like overpower damage, but also how the difference in multipliers that your build can gain access to will have fundamentally different impacts on your overall output, and basically just mathematically prove this once and for all. Now, what you're currently looking at is a clear by a player by the name of Nepter. Really smart person, have had a lot of good opportunities to be able to work with them, and basically what they've been doing is pushing on Surge Necromancer. This is their tier 109 clear. I think there's already been a tier 110 clear, and I know that Nepter is continuing to push here. Oh, and by the way, I'll just go ahead and include a link to Nepter's clear here just so you can go ahead and see it. But I reached out to Nepter and I said, hey, I want to use your build as an example in my video. Are you cool with that? They said yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate your graciousness. But let's go ahead and look at what Nepter's build looks like in the real world, because the stats on this thing are absolutely nutty. So the planner that you're looking at right now is Nepter's current real gear, including all of the actual greater affixes as well as the actual Masterwork crits that they have on that gear. And you'll notice that Nepter has a pretty good pair of Cruor's Embrace, 4 GA, and they have chosen to triple Masterwork on the Drain. Now, if you're up to date with the Surge Necromancer, that might seem incredibly obvious, but I don't think that everybody is necessarily fully up to date with this build. But if I'm to use Nepter's build as a basis to be able to prove this to you, I think that I can do it in a few short minutes. And what I would highly recommend doing is skipping around to the different timestamps that I have below in case you wanted to understand the impact of individual things. But I'll just go ahead and cut to the chase right here. TLDR, so you don't have to waste your time. Drains are the best. Masterworking critting on drains are the best. And now I'm going to show you the data just in case you don't believe that or you're interested to understand how we get there. I'll go ahead and include this datasheet down below as well in case you wanted to double check my math. But what you're currently looking at is a breakdown of Nepter's build and the impact that Cruor's Embrace have on it. Now, the first page that you're looking at is as if you weren't wearing a set of Cruor's Embrace and you just put on a non-ancestral version of it. So as opposed to Nepter's absolutely insane 4 GA triple Masterwork crit on drain, let's just go ahead and start removing these GAs, remove these Masterwork crits, and just take a look at what the build would give you if you had somehow magically Masterworked it all the way up to 12 out of 12 without being able to get a GA or a Masterwork crit, just to be able to set a basis for this. So the first stat on the gloves is going to be your maximum life, right? If you were to take off these gloves, Nepter only has 16,000 maximum life. Now I assume they're also going to use elixirs and consumables, but assuming that you don't want to use those things, I figure would be a better basis. So they currently have 16,000 life, and when they put on the gloves, they bump up to 18,500. Now, your sheet, your character sheet, has an overpower damage number on it. And a lot of people will point to their overpower damage number as some type of measurement of how much of this stat that they have. I think on my Bloodlance Necromancer, my sheet data said I had something like 13,000 or 14,000 overpower damage. Now, the funny part about that is that I actually don't have anywhere near that amount of additive unless I overpower. And then the other side of it is that's actually a grossly small representation of how much damage you actually have. So right here, if you ignore the big number and we actually just look at how much we have from stats, Nepter currently has 1,500 additive damage from stats. On top of that, they're also going to have critical strike damage from their stats. They're going to have vulnerable damage from their stats, generic damage, damage with physical, damage with blood, to elites, versus crowd control while they're healthy and while they're fortified. All of those are just your base additive damage numbers. And you'll see that I've cataloged all of them here. But what we need to understand is how much additive damage you gain from your maximum life. So to be able to assume this, we're going to say that Nepter is always at maximum life, which they are, and that they've also fully capped out on their fortified status as well, because both your maximum life and your fortify are used in an equation to figure out how much bonus additive damage that you get. Now you'll see here that I have additive damage from OP, from overpowering, and what the equation looks like is taking your maximum life, subtracting your base life, which is 400, and then dividing by your base life. That will give you a multiplier of hundreds of additive damage. In addition to that, you take how much fortify you have, which can be equal to your maximum life, and you simply divide that by your base life. And that means that on his base life, without Cruor's Embrace equipped, Nepter is gaining nearly 8,000 additive damage when they overpower, something that is not shown in your character sheet. What that means is that in total, they have 10,000 or nearly 11,000 relevant additive damage every single time that they overpower. And this is representative of a 110 times multiplier. That's insane, but it's true. That is how much this is representative of. You are multiplying your base damage by over 100 times when you overpower. Just to give you an idea of why these builds are so powerful and why every build is trying to overpower if it can. Now, if we were to compare that against the new maximum life total that Nepter gains by equipping Cruor's Embrace, no GAs, no Masterwork crits, but just by equipping them, they instead bump up to a whopping 12,000 additive, which is representative of 122 times multi. And the difference between these two things, either multiplying your damage by 122 or multiplying your damage by 110, is fairly simple to do. You just divide 122 by 110, and what you get is a 10% damage multiplier. So now that we understand the increase to the overpower damage and how that's going to work moving forward, let's talk about the other stats. The next one being the ranks to Tides of Blood. Now, Tides of Blood is an incredibly powerful multiplier because not only does it gain 5% per skill point, which is basically par for the course, but if you are healthy, which you are healthy 100% of the time, that bonus is doubled. So while typically on this setup of gear, most notably with this insane amulet right here, Nepter would normally have 10 ranks in Tides of Blood, giving him a 100% damage multiplier or doubling his damage. He's instead going to have 13 ranks. Right here in the Tides of Blood comparison, we basically just look at what the difference between 10 ranks and 13 ranks is. So as opposed to doubling your damage, you're multiplying your damage by 2.3. To figure out what the difference there is, again, we just take our final multiplier of 2.3, divide it by our previous multiplier of 2, and we get a whopping 15% damage increase. So already, the Tides of Blood stat on this piece of gear is outperforming our maximum life stat. Now, the important thing to understand about the ranks to Blood Surge, that also has to participate in our comparison of the impact that drains have, because you cannot have one of these stats or the other one on your build simultaneously, since the piece of gear has both of them on them. But just comparing ranks of blood normally, you have to consider that Blood Surge is actually a pretty multifaceted skill. It has a drain component, a Nova damage component. The Nova damage is then multiplied by how many targets you have drained, and then in addition to that, we also have the blood-bathed aspect. The reason why blood-bathed is being used in this calculation specifically is because this aspect only applies to the surge of the Blood Surge. That is the actual Nova that comes out. The drain is not impacted by this multiplier. So when we're attempting to understand how Blood Surge's damage is impacted, both by drains and by ranks, we need to keep all of these things in mind and in a single equation. Without Cruor's Embrace on, Blood Surge's drain damage is going to be 48%, and then its Nova damage is going to be 168%. Equipping Cruor's Embrace will bring that drain damage up to 62%, and then the Nova damage would be brought up to 217%. So if we assume that we have a single target, they are an elite monster, they're being drained from 5 times in total, because Blood Surge naturally drains once, and then Cruor's Embrace will give you 4 additional drains, so 5 in total. What we end up with is 822% total weapon damage. And the difference between our 822 base damage and our 636 base damage is nearly a whopping 30% increase in damage. So clearly, increasing the skill ranks of Blood Surge has been by far our total largest multiplier. And then we look at the number of drains. So while we've already touched on a lot of this with the Blood Surge ranks itself, the number of drains is a wild difference in the total output of your build, because you have to remember again that typically Blood Surge only drains 1 time, and since Blood Surge gives a multiplier to the actual Nova damage equal to the number of enemies drained, if we were fighting a boss and we only drained once, that means that we're only increasing that damage by a total of 5%. So when we're considering what the normal damage would look like on Blood Surge, if you didn't get the increase in the number of drains, you would still get those skill ranks from Blood Surge, like the initial bonus of skill ranks there. So your drain damage would be 62%, the Nova damage would be 217%. I would only get one of these drains, and I would only get one multiplier of 5% for my drains, and what that leaves us over with is a whopping 492% weapon damage. But increasing the number of drains to 5, not only is it draining that many times, but you're getting the damage of the drain that many times. So it's 5 times as many drains damage. So just right off the bat, that's already, what is this, 310% weapon damage just from the number of drains. And then again, since you get an additional multiplier for number of drains multiplied by 5%, that's a whopping 1.25 multi on the surge damage. What that means is that our 822% here is being compared against a single drains damage of 492. So that difference is a whopping 67% multiplier, a 67% increase in damage. Now, I promise you, the next sections are going to go significantly faster, but what I've done is quite literally break down what each one of these individual stats would look like if they were your greater affix. And then on top of that, I looked at every single stat and whether or not you had triple Masterwork credit. And I have 4 different sheets to look through very quickly, but I promise you incredibly fast analysis here. So first, let's just go ahead and look at the maximum life. We're just going to go in order of the stats that we've already done, and we'll assume that we're comparing, the Tides of Blood, the Blood Surge, and the Drains versus the base of it. So we're not changing those stats at all. They no longer are impacting our total damage output because they are now a constant variable, something that we don't have to worry about. So our old base life was the 18,000, the new maximum life is the 19,000. We went from having the total additive of 12,000 up to 12,500. And what that ends up being is a 3% increase in damage, a 1.033 multi. But what does it look like when we add 3 Masterwork crits to it? But that difference, adding in your 3 Masterwork crits specifically on maximum life, takes us from 19,000 to 20,500. That takes our additive from 12,500 up to 13,100. And the impact on your final multiplier there only ends up being a total of 1.048. So you've gained nearly another 5% damage increase in comparison to what it was previously. But the final multiplier that you would get in total, just like the total amount of bonus that you would get if you were to put a GA and then a Masterwork crit very specifically on maximum life, is an 8% damage increase, a 1.083 multi. Now looking at Tides of Blood, it is small, but it is impactful because this multiplier in your passive skill tree is just very strong. We just have to look at what our previous rank total was, which was 13 ranks, and our new total, which would be 14. So we go from a 2.3 multi up to a 2.4 multi. That gets us a whopping 4% damage increase, so already stronger than the maximum life total. And then if we were to triple Masterwork crit it, so adding it all the way up to 7 ranks, so that's obviously fairly huge, we get a whopping total of a 12% damage increase. So if you take what the original increase was plus what this original increase is as a difference, you end up with a whopping total of a 17% damage increase for getting a greater affix and then triple masterworking on the passive of Tides of Blood. Now Blood Surge ranks, again, are going to increase the Drain's damage and the Surge's damage. And when you consider the impact of still having the base of 4 Drains on it, plus the increase to the base damage, what you get is a 6% increase total, and then triple masterwork critting it, which is actually like hilarious when you look at the number. You go from 9 to 15 ranks on this thing because, like, sure, why not? You're actually bumping all the way up to an additional 18% damage increase, a 1.182 multi from the previous number. And then the final multiplier, so the initial boost and what this one granted to you, you get a total of a 25.8% damage increase, a 1.258 multi. Now the final thing to consider is the total number of drains. Putting a greater affix onto this is going to get you an additional drain, which is obviously going to have a fairly large impact. It's going to increase the total number of drains damage dealt, and it's also going to increase the multiplier that you get on your Nova itself. In comparison to what it was previously, is a 10% damage increase, so a 1.1 multi. Triple Masterwork critting on this is going to bump you all the way up to 8 drains, so double what it is before you do any of this, and obviously 3 more than it was previously. So now we're going to be looking at a total of 8 bonus drains, so 9 drains in total. We're going to get 9 times the drain's damage. We're going to take the multiplier for our Nova damage, which was before the 25% multiplier, and instead going to get a 45% damage multiplier on this. And what that equals out to in comparison to the previous multiplier. So keep that in mind again, it was a 10% damage multi, but in addition to that, triple masterwork critting on this is another 40% damage multiplier on top of that. So in total, having both a greater affix and then triple masterwork critting on the drain itself is representative of a 54% damage increase, a 1.542 damage increase. Triple masterwork critting on a GA for drain is more than 22% damage higher than triple masterwork critting with a GA on the Surge itself. So Cruor's Embrace, while just broken down purely mathematically for damage increase, the drains are absolutely the best option, both for your greater affix and for your masterwork crits. But on top of that, it then adds so much quality of life through this ability to actually trigger lucky hit chance that Blood Surge Necromancers effectively don't work without these gloves. But I hope that this breakdown of how these stats intermingle with one another, how the different skill ranks interact with one another, the passive ranks, how it impacts your additive damage, etc., has opened you up to be able to better understand and assimilate in information as it pertains to the build and why these stats are so important. why you shouldn't be wasting gold buying GAs if they're not on the drain, and why Masterwork critting on the drain is by far your most important outcome if you're attempting to min-max this build. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was a bit of a long one, but I was hoping to make it as short as possible. There's just a lot to cover. But if you are new here and you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, you don't want to be missing out on any of this type of analysis, because I try to bring the very best of what I can possibly do from what I've got stored up in here to you all. So hopefully this was digestible, you were able to understand it. If you were and you appreciated it, consider leaving a like on the video. It helps out a ton to be able to push me into the algorithm. And leave a comment down below if you still have questions, comments, concerns, different ideas, different outcomes. If you think some of the math doesn't add up, let me know. I try to spend as much time in my comments as possible, and I try to answer as many questions as possible. So if you had one, reach out to me down there. There's also a Discord link down in the description. You can join the Discord. There are a ton of nerds in my Discord who are just sitting there all day chit-chatting together, mostly about the Necromancer. So you can go in there, you can ask questions. If I'm not able to get to you, one of them definitely will be. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.